these I've studied in others as well, in cultivating an ecosystem in where service members and veterans feel safe, vulnerable, and they have purpose. Those are my core 3 objectives when I'm creating a space, right? And so that goes into the methodology of how I curate experiences. We have introductions, we have a liberty brief where we go over community guidelines and expectations. And if you don't want to adhere to them, then this is not the space for you. You can leave. And by setting that expectation, ensuring that people feel safe, it is so crazy to see the transition and how my events have evolved just like that. And it's so cool to sit back and be like watching it too. And so people allow themselves to be vulnerable and have discussions that they normally wouldn't have, because I ensured that that box of a space was good and safe for them to do so. And I don't think that's as regulated or as expected when it comes to military retreats and programs. Like, they have a standard way of doing things, but they haven't evolved from that. And you have to keep adapting and growing to the type of people that are coming into the military. It's, World War II veterans, Vietnam veterans, post 9/11, all these different types of people that are coming in. They are all very different eras of individuals. And so by shaping my experiences to that, I think that people have really started to alter their perspective and what travel means. And LiboRisk is actually a colloquialism that is derived from the Marine Corps, used prevalently too, and it's short for LiboRisk or liberty risk, right? Somebody who gets in trouble during their liberty or leave, or they get into risky scenarios, sketchy situations, they are coined a LiboRisk. And so it's related to travel, your vacation time. And for me, risk is such an important part of growth. We fear risk taking, but we applaud risk takers. And I share with people that through being receptive, respectful, and risky, you can be a better human being in all of your journeys. So there is a serious narrative to how I'm shaping travel and risk taking in the military community. I'm not haphazardly doing this. There is intense intention behind what I'm trying to recreate. And it's not out of just clout or social media or a public figure that I'm trying to build behind my face. It is because it literally saved me in ways. It helped cultivate the identity and the type of person that I am sitting here in this chair today for. And if I can replicate that and help somebody discover that through a new experience, through new interactions, through new cuisine or new museums or new treks, whatever it may be, that exists out there. And that has to be tailored to us in a certain way, because in the experience of the military, we have traumas and tribulations and trials that literally can make or break us. And so that's something that I've really, really committed to trying to learn more from. And I don't think that's really being done anywhere else.
Welcome to the Transition Drill Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Pantiani. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. So let's get into this.
You had an event yesterday. Tell me about it.
I did. We had a group of about 12 service members and veterans go to the Bee Leaf Sanctuary in Palma Valley area. And we got to learn about the importance of beekeeping and their importance in the ecosystem. It was really incredible. And they actually have 2 SEALs and a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps who works there. And they weren't available at the time, but our guide helped us learn about the intricacies of bee life and how similar it is to being in the military. They have like scouts and they have guards and they have nurses. And it was really interesting. And I was a bit nervous trying to evaluate if people would really be interested in something like this, especially in the military community. And they all walked away from it just like in awe. And it's so impressed with it. So it was really cool for me to put together something that I was a bit skeptical on and then see the fruits of it just blossom. It was really fun.
The limited knowledge I have of bees, but one of the things that I find very interesting is they are a product of their environment. And so when you go back to the honey that they produce, the honey is going to taste different in so many different regions because of the flowers that they're pollinating from. And I think that's really interesting is, I think for a lot of us, we think, oh, it's just honey. But when you really get into it and the people who really know bees and the honey making process, they can tell you what the flavor is going to be like based on what flowers are in the region.
Absolutely. And it was cool to learn that the history of beekeeping, the Egyptians actually have some of the oldest records, and it is incredibly detailed to the amount of beekeeping in the hives that they have to the production of honey. I mean, the Egyptians recorded that in hieroglyphics and stuff, and they kept in the tombs honey. And this is preserved. So, I mean, I would do some horrible things to try and taste that honey because it's the only product, essentially natural product, that doesn't expire. And so that honey is still in existence somewhere. But
so even when it congeals to a honeycomb, it doesn't ever deteriorate?
Not if it's preserved.
Oh, okay.
Right. So if we have it as a product and in a jar and stuff, it's something that, because I'm sorry, I don't have the full intelligence on this, but because there's no bacteria that gets into it and stuff, it's a very clean product. You can keep it forever. So it's the only thing that doesn't rot, essentially.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So there is somewhere a jar of honey that was in the sarcophagus in a tomb in Egypt. And I just think that's the coolest thing.
And probably quite expensive if you were to get a taste.
100%. It's cool to think about, though.
You wonder if the flavor profile changes over all of those years, or if it's the same as, when it was first preserved.
Yeah. Like perhaps wine, aging better like wine. Maybe. I don't know. That's something worth finding out.
Well, and I want to get into the company that you're running now, but obviously I want to talk about you growing up, going into the Marine Corps. So where's hometown for you?
I am from originally Dallas, Texas. So my family is still there. I don't really talk with them much, but my aunt, who's not even really related to me, she was just a best friend of my grandmother's, and I deeply loved my grandmother, was very close with her. So byproduct of that, she is my aunt.
I think we all have aunts and uncles that aren't blood, but they're family.
100%. Yeah.
And grew up your whole young life in the Dallas area?
Yeah, I was born and raised there. I went to a local school in Dallas, and then I went to Booker T. Washington, which is an art school, kind of veered off the normal path of life. And this art school is pretty prestigious. They have a lot of students who go off to go attend Juilliard, which is a really recognizable dance and theater school. And so for me, my focus, though, was on visual arts and photojournalism particularly.
Where did the interest in art come from? My
mother was a framer, and she was very good at it. I have to admit, she was a good cook as well. And my dad loved charcoal. He was a charcoal drawer. He loved drawing in general and was a sculptor as well and did ceramics. So I grew up around that. And again, being so close to my grandmother, she was an avid traveler and loved museums. So I got that early experience of going to museums all the time and seeing artwork, and just was really impressed by some of these beautiful things, these creations that humans made, out of their off time. And that's something that I was really inspired by. And I started drawing at a very young age and really enjoyed it, and was always just trying to incorporate art in any type of way throughout my life. So going to an art school was like a no-brainer for me. And it was a really cool experience to get to be around other high school students who were just as obsessed in the arts as I was.
Did you find, though, prior to going to an art school, did being so interested in art kind of put you on the outside of the norm of other kids?
Perhaps. I think oftentimes art nowadays isn't really exercised in the school system. We've kind of pushed it away from our regular interests, and we have reallocated our focus towards physical fitness or perhaps just sports, which I think is a great spectrum of growing up. But to balance that out with art is something that I believe is incredibly important to the upbringing of children. And if you look at the school systems in Europe, especially, I mean, it's so cool to see when you go to the museums there, these collective of classes that are going there at very young ages to look at art and to learn about art history. It's a really cool thing. So for me, I don't think I really got to align that with my my regular peer group, they were all focused on sports and stuff. For me, I was just more of an art nerd.
Did you ever try any sports, or did sports ever have an interest for you?
I did, but I was never very good. I am
two left feet, two left hands.
I'm humbly bad at everything. And I played volleyball and swam. I'm not a competitive person, so it was hard for me to like care about winning. I just liked doing it and being physically active. I felt better from being physically active. So at the time when I was younger, I didn't realize that being physically active can lead to feeling better. But now as an adult, I realize that, and that's why I maintain a physical fitness lifestyle. But I was into volleyball and swimming, and I was a horrible runner. Ran my first mile and a half when I was about to join the Marine Corps, and that was like dreadful. But other than that, I mean, sports wasn't incorporated in my high school. So I actually had to go to college and complete a yoga class as my credit for high school.
Yeah, brothers, sisters?
I do. I have an older brother and a younger sister whom I don't really speak too much, but they are out there somewhere doing something.
Coming out of high school, what year did you graduate high school?
2012.
And with the coming of the end of your high school years, what was your plan at that time for adulthood? Were you already thinking the military?
I wasn't, but my brother had spoken about the Marine Corps previously. He was interested in joining, and I had no interest in joining in the military, to be honest, especially coming from an art school and such a liberal environment that was against the military. But I started looking into photojournalism degrees, and I kind of realized that it was a field that didn't particularly care about your degree. It was more about your experience. And the military is one big fat, juicy experience. So I started looking at that as an avenue to approach photojournalism as my career plan. And I discovered that you can actually be a photojournalist in the military. I found out in the Army first, and I wasn't too happy about my meeting with them. And right next door was a Marine Corps office, and they're always open. So I went over to speak with a recruiter, and they were like, come on in. Very welcoming, and sat down and pretty much was sold from the first day. So from there, I went on to do the initial strength test, which is like a 1.5 mile run. And at that time, a flex arm hang and some crunches, which I did really well. But that run was really rough. And the thing that really sold me, having grown up with siblings that I wasn't close to, with parents that I wasn't close to, with friends that I didn't really have, when I went to run that 1.5 miles, I was the last person in that run, for sure. I still passed, but definitely last. And everybody who had completed the run came back for me to help cheer me on and to help me complete it. And that was just something that I had never experienced before, was like this sense of camaraderie and support to people that I had no knowing of. They were complete strangers. So that was something that intrinsically that really brought me closer to the idea of joining the Marine Corps.
And you said your brother also served?
No, he wanted to.
Oh, okay.
And that's how I even discovered that the Marine Corps exists. But unfortunately, he made some bad decisions and didn't graduate high school, and was ultimately became a felon, got mixed up with the wrong people doing the wrong thing. So his life didn't lead to that.
You mentioned that, kind of like growing up in an art school, and they were not pro-military. With your parents also being heavily into the art world, were they supportive of you going in the military?
I don't think they believed it initially when I said I was going to join, but I was the kind of person, even from a young age, that if I said I was going to do something, I went out to do it. And so they were supportive. They weren't necessarily against it. I don't think they even really understood what it meant to join the military, but my high school peer group was pretty negative about it. I had teachers that told me, like, you're just going out to kill people, you have no idea what you're doing, and like it's just pretty negative. And now that I look back at, not to talk shit on them, but it's just like to look back at the people that I went to high school with who had so much bad to say about my decision. I don't see them out in the world doing much, to be honest. And not all of them, but many of them. And it's just like, hey, we all make these decisions, and for you to make such a quick call on something you have no idea what you're talking about. I mean,
we all have to make our own paths in life, and granted, it doesn't fall in line with everybody's vision of what their path is. But at the end of the day, if you're friends, or as a teacher, you're a mentor, and so you should be mentoring your students to say, if that is where your heart's taking you, then follow your heart.
Yeah.
You know, and you'll end up where you need to end up.
Mm-hmm.
What year did you go into the Marine Corps?
2013, beginning of 2013.
And you knew going in photojournalism was where you were headed?
Yeah, because I was a female and tested highly on my ASVAB and I was a mixed ethnicity. These are kind of all little check in the boxes that recruiters look for just for diversity purposes, coming from Marine Corps recruiting myself and understanding that. I was able to really influence based on my job preference. And so I did get my job, surprisingly, which does not happen and I'm grateful for, but I was able to move forward with that and get a lot of really awesome training in photojournalism. We learned about writing, videography, photography, crisis communication, working with media, public affairs, a plethora of things. And I was like amazed by how developed that this curriculum was. And to me, military photojournalism is the most authentic because we can't lie. We ultimately can't. And there have been instances in history where people have tried to, and they've been caught real quick. So it's like, now we are taught to be as authentic as possible. Like we either don't disclose information because of security issues and whatnot, or it's like, hey, people know, and we have to be honest about this because the internet is there. We can't hide everything. So in a world of journalism now where things are so, I don't know, debatable and untrustworthy, I think looking to military journalists is a way to really have some credibility in the field.
Well, I think for both the military and the first responder community, one of the biggest changes over the last probably 4 or 5 years is the importance of transparency. Just put it out there. It may not look pretty, but like you said, don't get caught trying to cover it up. It is what it is. Put it out there and let's address it head on, or we're just not going to put it out for security reasons. And that's, I think, where we end up getting ourselves in trouble is when we try to hide it or we try to alter it, you know, and then ultimately somebody's going to catch you. Somebody's going to go, wait a minute, I've got this footage over here.
Mm-hmm. Bad news doesn't get better with time. I've learned that personally. So
just put our head in the sand. It's going to go away.
Yeah, 100%.
Were you thinking a career when you went in?
I did. I really love the Marine Corps. And I think I loved how it influenced me to have high standards and expectations of myself and the people around me. But I think that I fell into some hard patches where the 18 years of conditioning prior to that really had influenced who I was as a human. And because I never worked through that as an adult, through those traumas, through those issues, it kind of surfaced in instances where they either came up as failures because I made bad mistakes, or they influenced how I made decisions that probably weren't the best for myself or other people in my career. And so that did have an impact. But if I could go back in time and try and do 20, I probably would. And I would probably, of course, make better decisions. It is what it is now. But I look back remembering that the Marine Corps was something that I wanted to pursue for a long time.
And I want to get into a couple of the issues that forced you out of the Marine Corps, but you mentioned also doing recruiting. What transitioned you from the photojournalism to recruiting? Was it your choice or the Marine Corps' choice?
No, certainly the Marine Corps' choice, but a good one. So I started my career out in Quantico, Virginia, at Marine Corps Recruiting Command, which was interesting. I think the atmosphere there was pretty toxic, but the opportunities were pretty favorable. And I say that because as somebody who was working there, I essentially worked and covered a lot of the national events that were occurring for the recruiting mission. And we had events throughout the entire United States in really awesome cities. And I didn't take advantage enough of having a good time. I wish I look back and all I did was work, and I was so cookie cutter. I was such a good person. I was like, dang, I could have really partied and had a good time. But either way, I spent a year there doing that. And it was a pretty isolated experience. Again, having just difficulties growing up and I was a pretty socially awkward person. And so having such an isolated experience in Quantico, that really kind of made it worse for me. But after that was my first experience in recruiting. I got to go to Japan and work at the air station, and I was the future and current operations chief, handling all of the things that we did in terms of photojournalism and coverage alongside combat camera. And then I had spent my final part of my career in the recruiting station in Orange County, which is a very unique billet because it's kind of like an individual billet where we as a photojournalist get assigned as a marketing director. So we go through all this training that is niche focused and laser focused on selling the Marine Corps in a controlled area. So I covered all the way from San Clemente to Santa Barbara, working with the recruiters alongside them to help sell the Marine Corps through marketing, public affairs, social media, whatever it was to help them contract people. And that is not necessarily chosen. It's definitely selected for you by the United States Marine Corps. But I learned so much and I apply it so much today to what I do as somebody who runs a business. So that was kind of my experience in career field.
With, the saying, every Marine is a rifleman. How did you, going into boot camp and knowing that you were going to be going into photojournalism, was it something that you almost kind of received a negative pushback on? Like, oh, you're just going to go here to be a camera person?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no, especially in the veteran community. Now I do even more so, which is a weird thing. It's like, what's the competition? 80 to 90% of jobs are non-combative. They're in support roles. And so my hat's off to the grunts, especially the grinders that are out there in harm's way and, putting themselves in front of bullets. Like, that's not me. And I'm never going to try and claim that. I wouldn't be able to even perform that, being a smaller woman and knowing my capabilities, that's not what I would be good at in the United States military. If it came down to that point where I had to, we all fall back to every Marine a rifleman, some better than others, of course. I'm sure infantrymen would totally debate that. But I don't think I really got too much pushback because I was constantly around people who weren't infantry. So even in times when I went to 29 Palms to go to sergeant school, it wasn't too bad. I liked it. I like every place, I try to like it.
You are a traveler at heart.
I am a traveler at heart. I feel like every place is what you make of it. And so, I was exposed to more of the combatant jobs and people during that time there. And I think they're great, high caliber people. But I have also met great high caliber people in non-combative MOSs. And so I don't know. I think it's such a competition with people sometimes. I'm like, there's just no competition. We all had our role. We all are a cog to this large machine, just doing our role. That's it.
Well, and being able to see that bigger picture is definitely something that comes with maturity and time. The one thing that we talked about earlier, bad stuff doesn't get better with time, but the one thing that does improve with time is our ability to see the bigger picture and see that every piece is important. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who kind of stay in that very small shell and they don't look and they go, oh, you only did this. Well, yeah, but it was still vital to the entire mission of the Marine Corps. Yeah,
that is a level of maturity that some people really discover, especially when they get out, but some people don't. And I've kind of experienced that through especially social media and some of the judgment that I get. Well, you only did this, or well, you only did that. It's like, yeah, dude. And I mean, you went off to be a hardcore grunt and you're a hero in my eyes. Like, I'm not debating that. I'm not even measuring up to that. That's beautiful. And one of the interesting conversations that I had actually with a good friend of mine who is a former Navy SEAL, we were talking about this competition that exists within the veteran community, and where somebody says, oh, well, you're just this, you're just admin, you're just supply, you're just an air winger, whatever. And then the person who is in infantry, well, they say, yeah, but like you didn't go to combat. And then somebody says, well, yeah, but you didn't get shot at. And then somebody says, well, you didn't get hit. Well, and somebody says, but you didn't lose anybody. But then somebody says, well, I got hit and then I lost somebody. And then somebody says, I'm completely disabled and I'm missing limbs. All the way up to that tier of trauma. What is the competition through all that? I mean, it's heartbreaking to see. There's always somebody measuring up their experience of trauma. And when you get to that tier, that top tier of the worst, I mean, how do you want to live? It's hard for them to live. Nobody wants to be there. And I don't want to say they regret it, but it's like, that's so much that they have to endure. So this whole time we're just like working through this competition of trauma. And I'm like, what is the point?
my trauma is more important than your trauma. I mean, and I in no way want to try to put a blanket statement over everybody, but I do honestly believe there is a little bit of insecurity in the need to constantly try to one up. If you're not happy with who you are and what you accomplished, then you're trying to put others down. And I think that for me, what I've seen, especially from my side of the first responder community, is it's the same thing. You know, you look at somebody who's done 30 years. Well, did you do SWAT? Did you do this? Everybody wants to measure the 100-mile-an-hour teams, but that's not everybody. That doesn't define every single person. And be proud of what you did, and don't put down somebody else because they may not have done the same thing or more than you did. And I know I've heard from other people who have been in the 100-mile-an-hour teams, Navy SEALs, MARSOC, and they'll be the first to tell you, I can't complete my mission unless the guy working supplies is making sure I've got everything I need, and they almost embrace the lowest level and say they're just as important to the mission as I am being out there kicking the door. So, again, hopefully people in time mature. Mm-hmm. Like you said, though, your experience is not everybody does. And the other thing, too, though, there's no way around it. You've put yourself today in a position where you are out in the social media and your company is in the eye of the veteran community. And you're trying to get back to the veteran community. So unfortunately, the byproduct of that is you are also a target for those who want to try to knock you down. Yeah.
And that's why I promote travel so much, is because through the medicinal experience of adventure, excursion, travel, we can really expand our horizons on what it means to be human. And that's something that's often neglected in the military experience. We don't understand what it means to be a human being, to live, because we are so wrapped up in the uniform, the identity of our rank and our experience and, whatever else. We have to utilize whatever medicine there is in travel and be able to re-identify ourselves with the world. And so that's my biggest focus with it. And it really helped me in many ways, especially through times of failure and times of loss and grief and whatever else I experienced.
So you had a couple negative experiences in the Marine Corps. One, you got a DUI. Being that voice of reason, going back to that experience for somebody who might be potentially dealing with that right now, what advice would you give from your experience of it? And what might you have done? Obviously not get a DUI differently, but assuming that you got the DUI, what might you have done differently?
I would say that assessing whether you can really live your life without a substance is the first step. Realizing how is it impeding on your ability to live your life in a healthy manner? Are you lacking physical fitness? Have you stopped going to the gym? Have you stopped hanging out with your friends? Is it, are you becoming aggressive when you drink? Are you becoming sad when you drink? Are you drinking alone? Are you drinking because you can't sleep? Really paying attention to those. And it's hard to when you are a victim to the substance, right? Because alcohol attacks your brain and it attacks your body in ways that make you delusional to reality. That's how it was for me. I didn't even realize I had an issue until I had an issue. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I would want to encourage people to pay more attention to their troops, to their peers, even in the civilian world. Pay attention to our people more, because it is a silent killer. And we have to be able to bring recognition to what alcohol does to people, especially in the military where it is so prevalent and so glamorized in all aspects of our life. And in regards to the DUI, I honestly didn't confess to it originally. I was given foolish advice to keep it to myself because I was not the only one with a DUI in my unit. Not surprising in recruiting. But as we said, bad news doesn't get better with time. And I ultimately had to deal with the consequences at some point. But for me, I think it's really dependent upon the unit. if a commander, like me speaking to a commander right now, somebody who's in charge, somebody who's an OIC taking care of their Marines, and they find out their Marine just got a DUI, the first thing I would advocate for is to ask them if they're okay. Ask them if they're okay. How's your sleeping? How's your relationships? Like, dude, you just messed up big, and thank God you're not dead or somebody else isn't dead. But are you okay?
Well, you just hit on something very important. The DUI is not the pinnacle of that mountain. The pinnacle of that mountain is figuring out why you're drinking so much and why it's impacting your ability to make good decisions, i.e. not drive while intoxicated. Do you think, looking back on it at the time, did alcohol have a full grip on you? And did you show signs that your coworkers or your command should have seen before that point? Do you think?
I don't think they paid attention to me because I was so efficient and so autonomous at my job. I didn't have any peers. I was literally directly reporting to my executive officer, and that was it. I didn't have any staff in CICs. I didn't have any, colleagues that worked with me. It was literally my own office, which is very different, right, from what we expect as a E4 or E5 in the Marine Corps. But that was my experience. And so I was doing good. They didn't need to check on me. I wasn't somebody getting in trouble. I wasn't just somebody who didn't do my job. They were just like, man, she's on point. Like, she's good. And so I don't want to blame them and say that, right, that's their fault. But I don't think I was somebody that they had to worry about. And I don't know if I did show signs, but I probably did. And I say this because the one friend that I kind of made, who is a former Marine as well, she had a bodybuilding competition and had a lot of insecurity issues. She never wore a bikini, was super nervous about getting on stage and performing as a bodybuilder. And I missed her competition because I got so drunk by myself, which is really sad to say. And she calls me the next day. No, she texted me, just asked me what I was up to. And I just broke down crying because I knew I had disappointed her. I disappointed myself. And we went to go see each other and have a cheat meal after a competition. And she just looked at me and said, Jess, I don't know if you're still drunk or hungover right now. And that was the first time I really realized that I looked bad, that I looked so bad. And I could finally see it. It was like I had taken a pair of glasses off when she had said that. And I looked in the mirror that day and looked at myself, like my skin looked horrible. My hair was thinning. There was bags under my eyes. I'd gained weight. I was constantly working out and training all the time. And then I was like, wow, God, where does this weight come from? And that was when I realized it. How did nobody else catch this? How did nobody else catch this? Again, I don't want to blame them, but it's just like, we need to do better at looking at each other in the face and going, are you okay? And you had hit the nail on the head with saying, we need to look at the pinnacle reason for why we engage in consuming substances. I love the question. You don't ask why the drug, you ask why the pain. And we don't ask that enough in the military. And
you mentioned trauma growing up as a kid. Is that what do you think drove you to alcohol? Had you ever been involved in alcohol before going in the Marine Corps? No, I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs. I didn't do anything. I was incredibly sheltered. The only exposure I had to alcohol was my mother, and she was a raging alcoholic. I accidentally drank wine one time because she put it in a Gatorade bottle. That's how much of an alcoholic she was to a fault, and she got into a really bad car wreck one time, almost killed my sister. She blamed it on her pills, which this was knowing as an adult now, back in the 90s and early 2000s, the opioid epidemic that occurred because of Purdue Pharma with Oxycontin. I just learned about that this past year, and I'm like, oh my God, my mother was a victim to that. Right. She was taking that in tandem with alcohol and had crashed our car, could have killed my sister. And so because of that, I really disassociated myself from ever wanting to try alcohol. But unfortunately, it's hereditary, and it really does impact us when we're adults later on. And because I had such issues with connection and I was socially awkward, I felt like alcohol was this thing that could really make me a little bit more extroverted and cool and funny. And obviously those things are not true, but if to me, it felt like it gave me more substance to me as a person and my identity. And so I think that became a track record when I joined. And
being around alcohol, again, being such a prevalent substance in the military, it's something that kind of carried on.
I'll loosely say that you seem less introverted now. Is there anything that you've made a conscious effort to change in yourself to be more outgoing without the alcohol today?
I think through my exploration of books and podcasts and just listening to other stories, it's helped me become more confident in sharing mine. And so because I've had to share my story so much through my business and what I do now, I've really gotten to sink into that and understand my narrative and explain it a bit more. I still have trouble sometimes, especially around people who I'm highly impressed with and that just are incredibly high caliber. I'm like, I feel like shrunken a bit, that I don't measure up. But to me, every time we share our story, I feel like a little bit of us brightens up. We lighten up more. And that's just with practice. You're not the only person. I was just talking to somebody yesterday, like, wow, watching your story and hearing about your story, like, you know, and how you used to be and how you are now, that's like a complete 180. And it's like, yeah, I really am. I've grown so much through learning more and putting in the work to really diversify my intellect in all types of things. Again, books, podcasts, travel, just more connections with people, being more curious and less judgmental. I think that's the true prescription to that.
That self-introspection, I think, is the biggest thing that a lot of us don't do. It's real easy for us to hit obstacles in our life and blame others and never really take the time to look in the mirror and say, what was my involvement in it? And then I think in conjunction with that, taking the maturity to say, okay, I made a mistake. How can I help somebody else not make the same mistake by being open about, you know, what I did, as opposed to trying to hide from it's embarrassing. It is what it is. But when you take ownership of it, it actually, in my opinion, kind of reduces it a little bit, and it allows you to carry it more as a pebble as opposed to a big boulder, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you become more passive with the experience. And there's some things that to this day I've yet to talk about. And sometimes I would get frustrated or judgmental of people who may have experienced the same thing and they're open with talking about it. I'm like, yeah, right, kind of thing. That never happened. Or how can you be so okay with talking about things like that? Like, you know, which again is coming from a judgmental standpoint. I think, again, it comes from an act of maturity and acceptance, practice and sharing your story. And that takes time for everybody. It looks differently for everybody. And because our stories vary so much, we have to go through almost re-experiencing that experience when we say it out loud. And it just takes time and it just takes a little bit of effort. So,
well, that's why I preface the question, because there is absolutely zero judgment in my questioning of your events. My thing is that what you experienced is going to be individual to you, but at its core, everybody has probably had some sort of similar variation of it, or there are a lot of people who might have. And so if you could be that voice of reason to them, it allows you to give back through what was a negative experience for you. And hopefully maybe for them kind of divert their path and go, okay, here's where I need to make a correction. Practical example, you got bad advice about keeping that DUI quiet. Maybe somebody hearing your story right now that says, maybe I need to get some better advice. You know, something as simple as that is going to have a bigger ripple effect, I think.
Yeah. And in the veteran community, I think we oftentimes project what we think the actual reality of that experience was. And it's like, it's not even your story, bro. It's my story. And if you want to try and project how you think it may have happened or how it would have happened, you can try and do that all day, but it's not going to influence my reality. And the closer we get to just accepting people's stories and maybe having open dialogue about it instead of debating, it's not for discussion. It's not up for discussion or debate. It's up for listening. And we have such a hard time listening as it is. I think we just need to do better at absorbing. And, if you think it's bullshit, then walk on about your life.
Yep.
Walk on about your life.
Take what you want and either move on or embrace it. It's like trying to say, we could have done X different to prevent 9/11. 9/11 happened. It now is, what can we do to not allow it to occur again? And I'm going way overboard to give an example. But like you said, when you're telling your story, instead of judging me for all the things I didn't do back then, how about embrace the fact that I made a mistake, I'm owning up to it. What can others do in learning from me?
Yeah. Well, we have this circle of influence, right? And the microcosm of this little part that I influence and I have an impact on, that's all that I really should worry about, that circle of concern. And if I expand that too far out and I expand that too far out and expand that too far out, then I start to lose energy in my circle of concern because I'm exerting it everywhere else. Even the act of just debating with somebody's story is an exertion of energy towards something that I have no control over. Is that really worth it? Is that really worth it? Or should I just take the time to have a moment of reflection, consider what I'm thinking about this, and go about my day? That's about it.
Very true. So I want to move into the next incident, which was probably the final catalyst for you to get out of the Marine Corps, and that was a negative urinalysis. How did that come about, and what did you learn from that event? Yeah,
so I had been to Colombia about a year prior to that, and Colombia was kind of this rebirth vacation that I went on because that DUI that I had been demoted. I had my reduction in pay and all these other consequences ultimately, and it really stripped me of my identity, and I didn't know who I was. I only loved and only knew Sergeant Quezada. That was it. I didn't have any other personality or identity or anything outside of that. And so when I was stripped of that, I really had to sink deep and go introspective and discover who I was. Again, through travel, being the medicinal outlet that it is, that's where I learned about it. And I had a friend of mine who had mentioned all the really cool experiences that exist in Colombia. It's the third most diverse ecosystem in the world. You can go sand duning one day, hiking in the jungle the next day, to the beach the next day. It's just like a really cool place. And so I set out to go on this trek called La Ciudad Perdida in Tayuna. And it was an amazing experience. That was really where I learned about myself and got to connect with so many different people. But when I was there,
Was this a walking trek?
Yeah, it was a 4-day trek. And it's a place that's older than Machu Picchu, actually. So being in South America, the coca product that is sold there, it's unregulated. Like right. It's just a regular tea product that's in South America, and it's very common, especially when you're going on these treks, and it's used for altitude sickness to help relieve the side effects that you have from it. And so I had purchased it during my trek and brought it back. I didn't declare it through customs, which I get asked this a lot. They're like, how didn't they find it and stuff? And it's like, well, I didn't declare it. I didn't even know it was a thing that I couldn't have.
Right.
And so once I brought it back, I had kept it because I keep a lot of teas and stuff, and you can keep teas. Like, I don't know why people think that you can't keep teas for a while, but I kept it. And ultimately when I had consumed it at the time, it was about a year later, a little bit less. And that's when I had been called in by my sergeant major like a week or two later, and he had told me that I had resulted in a positive urinalysis for it. And so coca is not like cacao or cocoa, and not being a native Spanish speaker, I really didn't know. Again, I grew up fairly sheltered. I wasn't around drugs growing up or around alcohol growing up. That wasn't a thing that my parents talked to me about. And I never have owned a TV. I don't watch television. I don't get my source of information through that. So I genuinely feel...
You still don't have a TV today?
No, I don't watch TV. I'm not big into it. I don't own any accounts for like Netflix or anything. But my absorption through information is through social media and stuff, and through what I learned through traveling and stuff. But that was not something that I was learning about at the time. And so ultimately that was kind of the situation at hand. And the thing that was pretty frustrating too, which come to find out is still now an issue, is the foreign clearance guide and the entire vacation process that you have to go through in order to execute leave in a foreign country. They have still not updated it in regards to the coca tea, which blows my mind. Like there's no information on it. And I saved all my emails and pretty much everything regarding that trip. When you say that, not having traveled to Colombia, are you talking about the Colombian government? No, sorry. So in the United States military, as a DoD employee, you have to go through a plethora of prerequisites in order to go to a country, especially like Colombia. You can't just go there. Your command approves it. They give you a brief about the country. You learn about the culture, customs, regulations, things you can and cannot do. And coca tea was not on that. There was no mentioning of coca tea, which you would think as a legal substance that is a regularly sold product throughout South America, that would be mentioned. So it's and this, again, a naive question. It's sold very prolifically throughout South America. And especially when you do these jungle treks, like especially for people who've gone to Machu Picchu, it's there all the time for the hike there. But it's a normal product. It's not a taboo thing. So if you don't know, then you don't know. Right. And so when you ultimately came back with a negative urinalysis, what was the process like in the sense of, if you could go back and do it again, was there a viable fight that you could have put up to be able to stay in? Or was it just kind of done? Well, I had the DUI in the same enlistment, and so that definitely holds weight, and it doesn't look good for me. And because I hadn't disclosed my DUI at the time, there was a bit of mistrust, right? Got it. And rightfully so. And so at that point with my lawyers, I had a JAG, the military lawyer, and my own personal lawyer. They were like, look, you can try and fight to stay in, but your re-enlistment's going to be very hard. Got it. Let's just be honest about it. It's going to be very hard. And the probability of going Marine Security Guard, which was my dream, that's out the window. There's no way, which I had actually previously applied, been approved for, and then it was revoked suspiciously. That's a whole nother conversation. But so I was just like, man, weighing the option, it's like, I can take the general under honorable discharge because it did come out positive. It is what it is. I still did something illegal, right? Right. I brought this substance back. I still drank it. I'm still guilty of that. There's no denying that. And I showed them the positive through the, brewing the tea essentially. And despite all of that, I realized that the fight was not worth fighting and that the universe in some sort of way was telling me it was my time to get out. It happened for the best of reasons. And looking back at it, there were so many, like you said, catalysts that really started to nudge me and say, hey, Jess, like you need to go heal. You need to get out. You could keep doing this, but you are not healing. You are not becoming who you ultimately deserve to be at the best that you can be for other people. The Marine Corps is no longer that answer. And how many years in were you at this point? 8 years. And before being called in to do the urinalysis test, and you kind of already hit on it, what was your mental mindset at that time? Were you thinking that were you already starting to kind of think maybe I'm done with the Marine Corps? Maybe I did. So the MSG thing, I was approved for it and I was so excited because getting a DUI and applying for that program is very difficult. My command was so supportive. I do have to say they were incredibly supportive and helpful in trying to help me bounce back. I wanted to do nothing but that program. And they wrote must be selected verbiage on there. I mean, very supportive information for my recommendation. But when it was approved, I didn't get too excited for some reason. I was like, like this is cool, but I wasn't jumping up for joy. And so when it got revoked suspiciously, without really much of a reason why, they had given me orders back to Quantico. That's where I began my career. I did not want to finish it there. And that was on the hopes of going to MSG and getting approved at then. There's no guarantee. So I think probably I did have some sort of loss of hope and inspiration to stay in at that point. Had you achieved selection to MSG, did that mandate a specific time commitment afterwards? Yes, it was, I believe it's 3 years. So I would have been re-enlisting for that specifically. Got it. So got out what year? 2020. And that initial transition out,
how was it for you? I mean, how much lead time did you have before you transitioned out where you knew, all right, I'm going to be getting out? And were you making any steps at that point for what you were going to do afterwards?
So I had a really unique situation in which I'm so grateful for, because my turnover, the person who was taking over from my position had gotten there actually prior to the whole coca tea incident. So we were doing the transition beforehand, and then that happened. This was COVID 2020, like the peak of COVID. So again, my hats off to my command, because they were just like, look, this is a shit show of a situation. You obviously need to go figure out what you're going to do, because you might have nothing. Go do that. Go figure that out. So I did the transition turnover with my replacement. And then for pretty much the entire 2020 period, I worked like 2 other jobs and was trying to figure it out. They let me just go off and do that. I did not have to report back in because she had officially taken over, and it's an individual duty. So
2 other jobs within the Marine Corps?
Yeah, while in the Marine Corps. So I was like working and trying to save money and just figure out what was going to happen, because I had no clue. I thought I was going to get a dishonorable or OTH, which is like no benefits. So, and I don't have much family. I don't have any home to go back to. So this was it. I had to figure out what I was going to do to survive at that point. And I spent all 2020 doing that, silently freaking out while silently trying to just better myself and be okay, read, learn, do anything I could possibly to just prepare for the worst. And ultimately ended up being best case scenario. And at the time too, I was looking at the cheapest living scenarios, which I looked at a van and I was like, this is pretty cheap. I could possibly do this. Worst comes to worst and I have nothing, right? And then I found a school bus on Facebook and I was like, that's cool. I want to do that. So I actually bought a bus before my admin step occurred. I bought a school bus so I could prepare for the worst. And it ended up turning out best case scenario. And at the time I was co-owning a lumber company with a Marine Corps veteran. This was one of the other jobs that I worked. So it was like, I worked at a chiropractic office and then I was like co-owning a lumber company at the time too. And then Marine Corps. So
and that's why I was asking. So the 2 jobs you were working were outside the Marine Corps while you were still active duty?
Yeah. Okay. Just to bring in money and stuff and save up and prepare. And so he had all the tools that I needed to in order to build out this bus. So I would literally go drive all the way out into Temecula area and then work all day with him and build it out and then drive all the way back and nonstop doing that for a couple months. And when I had my administrative separation, it was determined that I was a general and honorable. I ended up moving out and moving into the bus full time. So I really prepared to have nothing. And I think having grown up with such a resilient, autonomous lifestyle, I had to be so self-sufficient when I was younger because of my mother and her addictions and not being able to take care of us. And I think that really proved to be so helpful in this situation because I didn't ask for help. I was just like, I got to make the best of it. And I think it's hard for people in the military to ask for help. I probably could have asked for help, but I'm proud of the fact that I was able to do that on my own. And now it's made things so much easier because I know worst comes worse. I can always rely on myself for whatever I may need.
Are you still living in the bus?
I am. I love it. I'm about 3 years in. It's so much fun. And I'm such a minimalist at heart. I'm so okay with having nothing. And I think many of us in the military are. If we decide to make this a consistent, regular transition for people in the military, I think they would be so happy. But I do. I have it and I love it. And a majority of my travels actually happen internationally with it. I don't really travel much in the bus. I just live in it.
For my really old listeners, because you're not part of that, it'd be cool if you painted it like the Partridge Family bus.
Partridge Family bus?
It's an old TV show. Google it when we're done with this. So that initial transition out, sounds like it went well. Mm-hmm. Any struggles mentally or anything like that in that initial step off out?
I think just the unknown of what my situation might look like. That was really hard. And I couldn't let myself get obsessed with thinking about it. The worry. I think that is so, you get wrinkles from that. you get wrinkles from that. And if I learned anything from my grandmother, she said to never worry. And she lived to 95, so I believe in her. But I really tried to not stress out about the unknown. And that was the hardest thing, is not really having anybody to talk to about it, not really having anybody to confide in or relieve my tensions to, because it was just me. And I regret not making more friends and mingling more and meeting new people in the area that I was at, because I think that could have really benefited me mentally when going through that. But it was something that I had to endure. It was a part of the process. And I think that, again, my command being so, I don't want to say chillax about it. They weren't chillax about it. They were just like, they weren't super controlling about it. They weren't trying to control me or trying to make me feel worse about it. So I think their support in that manner really helped.
So today you have your own company, and I want to talk about that. How soon did the idea for it come about, or what prompted it? Because it's based around travel. So obviously I know where the motivation is going to come from in your desire to travel. But where did the initial kickoff to go, hey, let me make a company out of this come from?
So during my time in Japan, I traveled pretty oftenly, especially during the 96 periods, which is about a 4-day vacation time frame that we have for holidays. And I'll just say up front, I am very aware that not everybody in the military has this type of opportunity. There are many people that work longer hours and longer days than I ever did. But part of my experience was getting to have some of this free time, and I did take advantage of that. And when I would go to Thailand or Malaysia or Borneo or all around Japan, people were constantly asking, how are you doing this? How are you figuring this out? How are you how are you making travel accessible to you? And I kind of realized, like, not many people are educated on these experiences, on these opportunities that exist. And again, my grandmother being the avid traveler and wanderlust woman that she was, it was very inspiring to me. And I knew that I wanted to be a traveler in some sort of capacity during my time in the Marine Corps. That was one of the reasons why I did join too. But I wanted to address that problem and create an ecosystem where we could be inspired, we could be educated, we could be given resources and tools to actually take the time off in beautiful places that, with the time that we earned as service members. And I wanted to create a travel community that would speak to that. And that was the birth of LiboRisk. And especially during my time when I went to Colombia, I spent like a month out there, and people were like, what? How did you do that? Well, it's like, because I worked 11 months straight, including all weekends. And then I saved up for this 1 month. And again, being the unique situation, again, many people work much longer days than I do. I'm not going to debate that. I was able to say to my command, here's my itinerary. Here's what I plan to do. Here's my budget. And my tasking list is clear for the next month. Can I go do this? And they were like, yes. So it was very easy, especially coming up with a battle plan and presenting that to my command. That is something that troops don't do or not taught to do. So the command members look at them like, you're irresponsible. You have no idea what you're doing. Hell no, we're not going to let you do that. Again, the ecosystem that needs to be born is a place in which we share travel as something that is accessible and real. And there's practicality to it that didn't exist. And so I wanted to create something that could speak to that. And it's just been a really fun experience for me building that since then.
Before we go further into your company, I'd like to talk to you about your grandmother a little bit, because she sounds like such a huge impact on your life. Where did she grow up?
She grew up in Peoria, Illinois, and that's where she's buried. And I wish I asked more questions about her growing up.
Do you know where her just desire to travel came from?
I think her parents were pretty worldly. She grew up around like butlers and maids.
Oh, wow.
She had a pretty well-to-do family, but her family made her work. I mean, she still had to become self-efficient in a time when being a woman and self-efficiency and autonomy didn't matter. You did what you were told. And she was kind of the spirit that just didn't. She wanted to go do what she wanted to do. And she was married and divorced like several times, again, in a time where you didn't do that. And she was constantly just exploring with her friends or her partner. And so I'm not really sure where that stems from, but I think it's just like organic to who she is. It's hard to explain. I think many women have this Pocahontas spirit in them that's kind of like deep, and we haven't really gotten to express that until we're around other people. Men too, but there's something intrinsically wild about a woman who can go off and do that alone and be unafraid.
It sounds like she would have been an amazing woman to meet, and just to kind of hear some of her stories. And like you've already mentioned, you kind of regret maybe not asking more questions, but you were young at the time. You know, how do you know hey, I should be asking, more questions? Did you get to take a lot of trips with her growing up?
I didn't. I regret that.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. She just passed away, so I didn't. But she took me to theater shows and museums all the time as a kid. And I really wish I did at some point. And my time in the Marine Corps, I spent a lot of it obsessed with working, So now that I'm out, I'm getting to go off with my aunt. That was her best friend. They pretty much grew up together, and we're going on a road trip. And that's kind of my gift to her, as somebody who helped raise me too. And she's such a worldly, artistic person as well. So that's something that I'm really excited to give to her and experience with her.
How long is that trip going to be?
About 2 weeks. We're going to start in Albuquerque, head to Arizona to see the Grand Canyon. I've never been there, and she saw it when she was a younger gal. So it'll be nice to take her back and relive that with her. And then we're going to make our way up to Zion, and then pass over to Moab, and then down to Colorado, back to Albuquerque.
I would have assumed, with all the talk of your travel, that the Grand Canyon would have already been crossed off your list.
I know. I don't travel as often in the United States. And to me, I feel like America is going to remain the same for quite some time. Our cities are going to get bigger. We're going to become more developed in areas that are rural. But for the most part, we're going to remain the same. But my fear is the places in Europe, in South America, and Southeast Asia that are so unique and culturally rich, those might change forever. And I do not want to miss that. That's where I'm going off and to explore, in the places that might disappear.
So going back to your company today, LiboRisk, and we talked about your event yesterday, which was a small scale event, but you also on your calendar have an Alaska trip planned for later this year.
Yeah.
Somebody interested in getting involved in your company from a consumer, what are you offering them besides just the trips?
So the route that I'm taking initially is as a for-profit. And the reason I'm doing that is because it's just me working this alone, and it's a lot. Until I get a partner or other co-owners right now, I'm moving forward with a for-profit business, and we sell merchandise, and I'm a full fledged travel agency. As a travel agent, I sell travel services and products, and then allocate a percentage of all those profits to helping pay for the costs of the retreats. And mind you, these retreats are very low cost. And because of our audience, we are service members and veterans, I'm able to work with companies and get group discounts because of the type of group that we are, which is awesome, because oftentimes all that we see on the internet are these overpriced, all-inclusive, sheltered experiences. You're in this vacuum, essentially, or this bubble of a trip that is not truly engaging to the people or the places that you're at. And so they cost like $2,000. And I'm like, I can't afford that. I'm not going to make somebody else pay for that. So I curate these experiences by arranging the logistics, and then we just split the cost. I don't make any money as a host or a guide. I'm nobody special. I'm just somebody that cares about connecting people in the military space, and that's it. But as far as the money that hopefully starts to come in a little bit more often is the merchandise and the travel agency.
And with these events or trips that you're curating, is there also the ancillary component of community and tribe for veterans? And are there associated, I'll call them gatherings where you talk about being a veteran? And are you kind of following with what I'm saying?
Yeah. So like the intangibles of the experience. For me, one of the things that I've really committed to learning about is the aspect of community. There are really great books out there like Tribe by Sebastian Junger, Code of Culture, Business of Belonging. These I've studied and others as well in cultivating an ecosystem in where service members and veterans feel safe, vulnerable, and they have purpose. Those are my core 3 objectives when I'm creating a space, right? And so that goes into the methodology of how I curate experiences. We have introductions, we have a liberty brief where we go over community guidelines and expectations. And if you don't want to adhere to them, then this is not the space for you. You can leave. And by setting that expectation, ensuring that people feel safe, it is so crazy to see the transition and how my events have evolved. Just like that. And it's so cool to sit back and be like watching it too. And so people allow themselves to be vulnerable and have discussions that they normally wouldn't have because I ensured that that box of a space was good and safe for them to do so. And I don't think that's as regulated or as expected when it comes to military retreats and programs. Like they have a standard way of doing things, but they haven't evolved from that. And you have to keep adapting and growing to the type of people that are coming into the military. It's, World War II veterans, Vietnam veterans, post 9/11, all these different types of people that are coming in. They are all very different eras of individuals. And so by shaping my experiences to that, I think that people have really started to alter their perspective and what travel means. And LiboRisk is actually a colloquialism that is derived from the Marine Corps, used prevalently too, and it's short for LiboRisk or liberty risk, right? Somebody who gets in trouble during their liberty or leave, or they get into risky scenarios, sketchy situations, they are coined a LiboRisk. And so it's related to travel, your vacation time. And for me, risk is such an important part of growth. We fear risk taking, but we applaud risk takers. And I share with people that through being receptive, respectful, and risky, you can be a better human being in all of your journeys. So there is a serious narrative to how I'm shaping travel and risk taking in the military community. I'm not haphazardly doing this. There is intense intention behind what I'm trying to recreate. And it's not out of just clout or social media or a public figure that I'm trying to build behind my face. It is because it literally saved me in ways. It helped cultivate the identity and the type of person that I am sitting here in this chair today for. And if I can replicate that and help somebody discover that through a new experience, through new interactions, through new cuisine or new museums or new treks, whatever it may be that exists out there. And that has to be tailored to us in a certain way, because in the experience of the military, we have traumas and tribulations and trials that literally can make or break us. And so that's something that I've really, really committed to trying to learn more from. And I don't think that's really being done anywhere else, not to toot my own horn, but I don't see it anywhere else.
I think it sounds great. One of the things that immediately comes to my mind is, do you encourage the veterans who are coming to your events to also include their families and their partners so that the families can learn more about the experiences of their family members from the veterans' perspective?
I would like to eventually. And I've had family members before and I've had kids before, and it's a lot for me. It really is. Not being a mother myself, not having kids myself, it's kind of hard for me to relate. And so I understand that that's a barrier of mine right now. And if eventually I get somebody who comes on as a partner, as a business owner, who is a family member and who can help me do that, I think they would be a better spokesperson for that, a better guide for that, a better host. But for me, I can't. I have a limited capacity when it comes to being able to, do all this.
What's the long-term goal for your company? What would you like to see it grow to?
I would love to envision a global app where people are able to connect from their LiboRisk account and be identified either via service member or veteran through their account, and they can connect with others. They can be a host, open up their home to another service member or veteran. They could home swap. They can exchange itineraries and say, hey, I went here. Hey, I went here. Or, hey, this is my, don't do this, or this is my guidance to this place. Having a full-fledged travel agency with employing service members and veterans who are ethical, responsible, respectable travel agents, which that's a whole other story. That's not very common in the travel agency industry. And then ultimately hosting experiences around the world at a low cost, because one of the things that we also do is we support military, recreational, and outdoor organizations that exist. And many of them have niche activities, whether it's rock climbing, kayaking, fishing, hunting, whatever it is. I'm not trying to recreate any of that. I don't do any of that stuff. I'm a jack of all trades, master of none of it. And so if I can just be this overarching umbrella and ecosystem that promotes a specific attitude and character and ethos, and then push those people out into the world, and maybe they engage with those organizations, they support, they donate, they bring awareness, whatever it is, I'm okay with that. I'm not trying to steal anybody's client. I'm just here to create a mindset and then build a profitable business through that, and then host events and experiences. So being able to be the go-to number one military travel resource with all these additional add-ons of an app, of a retreat, of a website and social media, of connections, that to me is just like big and beautiful. But if it fails in like 2 years and like all it is a social media, ecosystem for people to share stuff online, then I'm cool with that too. I'm not married to the idea that failure exists. I'm just in love with the process of this, and more so in love with the people that I've met. It has been, I think this is why I am more extroverted now too. The people that I have met and how they've reacted to my process of growing this and how supportive they are, it's given me permission to be more outspoken and blossom more through that process. And that's really part of it too.
Well, and I think that your success is going to come because, from what you're saying and what it sounds like in getting to know you, is you're not doing this to feed your ego. You're not doing this to make your wallet bigger. You're doing this to give back to the greater good of the overall community. And maybe it's altruistic thinking in my mind, but by trying to make the world better, it's going to make your company better.
Yeah. And I think that through the military, when you talk about transition, the hardest thing that people come into realization is that they have to transition. They have no idea who they're going to be or what they want to do. And for me, I've realized through LiboRisk, I have found something that I'm passionate about and that I'm pretty good at when it comes to event coordination and planning and looping in people and stuff. I've found my passion, and now I've found a way to give back to people. That's the equation. Find your passion plus find a way to give back to people. That equals happiness. And one of the best books that I've read that literally personifies this is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He is a Holocaust survivor and a psychologist, very intelligent, and through logotherapy, which is essentially the expression of this, is finding your passion and whatnot. Through that and accepting your scenario, whatever that may be, and then finding the best in that scenario, that is how people can rise through the flames and they can become better through that situation. So that book, I've recommended to many people, and it really changed my life in finding my own meaning. But I think that's a key piece in that people really need to consider when they transition out. It's like, what do you love to do? Stop asking what you're good at doing. What do you genuinely love to do? And figure out a way to give back to people through that thing. And then the universe will just throw things at you. It is crazy to me to look at all of the things that started happening in these past few years when I got out and when I started pursuing my passion with LiboRisk. It's like the law of attraction. I have been magnetized to opportunities because whether it's God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, sees that my passion is aligned with my purpose. And now I'm executing in that line of fashion, and it's just coming out exactly how it needs to be.
And you said this previously, and it's very important for people to understand. You mentioned that being a sergeant in the Marine Corps was your only identity in life. And the key is, especially coming towards that transition, is identifying who you are as a person and then finding what feeds your soul, and not thinking that everything is tied up in a uniform, in a rank, in a, team assignment, a unit assignment. It comes back down to defining who you are as a person and making that person the most important thing for your transition.
Yeah. That's all it is. That's all it is. And it's a hard thing that people have to accept. A guy I was dating, actually, he is getting out. He just got out and was working with SWIC, like the boat guys with the SEAL teams. And I asked him, I was like, babe, what would you want to do that was fun when you get out? And his response was, I want to go work with like Our Rescue, which is like an anti-trafficking thing or whatever. And I'm like, you think that's fun? Like the definition of fun? It's like, I know you're so qualified to do that. I know you are, with your background and your intellect and your capabilities. And that's super meaningful and purposeful. That is a really brave thing to do. But would you call that fun? And he's like, no. And I was like, okay, let's work on this question again. What would you do if you could do anything that was fun when you got out? And he's like, maybe I'd be a rancher. And it's like, okay, we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere. And then we were working on it. And he's like, maybe I want to be a writer. Like, I really love writing. I was like, go do that. Yes, go do that. And you know what? He ended up getting an internship with Coffee or Die magazine with Black Rifle Coffee. And now he's working with Matt Taibbi, one of the top journalists in the industry. And I'm so happy for him. I'm so proud of him. And it's like, we had to work through that. You really had to ask that question. What would you do that, like, you would really like to do that you love, that is fun? And that's such a hard word to navigate for a service member. So I really employ people to do that before they get out. Really start navigating that word fun and figure that out.
And embracing that there's nothing wrong with finding, let's not even call it a job, just a means of supporting yourself that is fun. I think so many of us, we get over wrapped up in, well, I just have to support my family. And so I'm just going to take a job. But if you're in the position to truly follow your heart and feed your soul, be open to it. I was just having a conversation the other day with a former guest and owns his own company. And we were talking about it. Every one of us has had that conversation, sitting in a group of people around a table and come up with a business idea. But the thing is that how many of us take that idea and take that first step? Like you said, be afraid, take the risk and see where it goes, and be open to, this may fail, but as opposed to just sitting back and going, I had the idea, but I didn't do anything with it.
Yeah. There's so many of us that are reserved in the notion of what may be. We have to be able to embody what that failure might look like and the lesson that it involves. It's so rewarding when we look back. There's a wonderful book by Matthew McConaughey. I'm obsessed with him, called Green Light.
He's horrible to look at.
No, he's so good looking. God, I love him. He's so great looking. There's a book called Green Lights, and I believe I read this during my admin step process as well. But that book is perfect for this, because the reason why he calls it Green Lights is throughout his life, he shares in this book the trials and tribulations, the good times, the bad times, meeting his wife, his father dying. And the green lights are those moments where we're just, the art of running downhill, he says, where it's just smooth and it's easy and all right, you know? And then you have the yellow lights where it's like, oh, this is a step back. You know, this is hard. I need to pump my brakes a bit. I don't know how I'm going to handle this. And then there's the red lights where it's catastrophic. Me for my admin step, right? My DUI, crashing my car. Those are red lights. And he eloquently illustrates how beautiful that transition is from red lights, yellow lights to green lights. I mean, that transition happens and you can look at every red light in your life and be like, wow, that was a green light. I just have to shift my perspective. And it truly is a green light. And I think now looking back at all of the things that were red lights in my life, they happened for a reason. And I'm happy that they happened. The tragedy in that. And it's like symbolic to like a volcano or something, right? When a volcano erupts, it just decimates everything in its path. But within a few days, maybe a few weeks, the green that starts to surface from that, the soil and the, the destruction that came from it blossoms at some point. And we have to take time to see that it's going to come out, whether we know it or not. But in due time, things happen for a reason.
Using that analogy of the volcano and erupting, going back to, Joe Rogan's podcast, just one of his recent episodes, he was talking about how Hawaii is a volcano and we all travel there and sit on those beaches and drink the Mai Tais, but it all came from a volcano erupting. Things bad happen at the moment. They cause destruction. They cause upheaval in our lives, but it's what makes us strong and makes us stronger is not letting that single event define us and stop moving forward. And I'll give you credit. You've had some red lights in your life, but you've obviously, picked yourself up by the bootstraps and said, I'm going to keep moving forward. So I commend you for that.
Thank you. That's all we can do. That's all we can do. One of the things I will add to that I believe was a huge support system during this entire time, and still is to this day, is the study of philosophy and learning what Stoicism was. It is an incredible genre of philosophy that illustrates how we should persevere in life in a very practical, unemotional way of living your life in accord to nature. That's what it essentially is. And so I think really discovering that has been a protocol in how I conduct myself on a daily basis. I have this term that I use called non-negotiables. What are my non-negotiables for the day? And through adding stoicism, physical fitness, enhancing my intellect, and then social connection, these are my non-negotiables. And then being in nature is one of them too. Those are my non-negotiables. How do I shape my life to attack those non-negotiables and ensure that nothing perpetrates that? That came from stoicism. And that is something that, thank God, I really found, because if I hadn't, I don't know, maybe my life would have been a lot more different, or maybe less successful in this navigation of life, we call it.
You forgot to mention swimming.
Swimming.
Because you're getting ready for the SEAL swim.
Yeah. Gosh. Oh God, that's going to suck. It's going to be so good. I'm so honored to come out there. I have a little bit of like imposter syndrome with this right now, because the gentleman who invited me, Rob, a former Navy SEAL, I look up to him so much. He's such a blessing in my life right now, and a true friend. And he invited me out. He has a great crew that is going out there. Many veterans, many patriots, especially in the SOF community. And I look at myself and I'm like, who the hell am I to be joining this crew? Like, what? I'm so honored. And to look at the experience too. It's in New York City. We're going to be swimming. We run 1 mile, and then it's a 3-mile swim. We go to this Liberty Statue of Liberty, and then we swim the rest of the way, run 1 mile, and there's push-ups and pull-ups involved as well. But when I think about travel too, I've never been to New York City. I've never been to Ground Zero. And I was fairly young when 9/11 happened. And just to listen to people who are a bit older than me, the generation just before, talk about 9/11, you don't have a dry eye in the space, because for me, it's palpable. That heartbreak, that devastation, that loss of life is still sensitive to my existence, right? Maybe the generation after me and just after, they can't feel it as much, but for me, I still can. And just to be around people who truly felt at like an adult age and interpreted and understood what was happening, I can't even imagine what that was like. And to be there in honor of the spirit and the heroism and the patriotism that this country represents, it's like, that's so moving to be able to go somewhere and to be invited with a group of people. Like, to me, this travel experience is a part of something that, again, I don't need to go to some luxurious resort with a cocktail on a beach. This is enough to sustain what it means to me in travel and adventure, is to go somewhere that is moving, that is patriotic, and with people that I consider outstanding individuals in the military space. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, I wish you the best of luck with it. Are you a swimmer? Is this your first venture into swimming, or have you done it before?
So when I was younger, I used to swim competitively. Again, I wasn't the greatest, but I know how to swim. I can swim fairly well. And one of the things that I did used to do, and I would love to get back onto, is the Underwater Torpedo League. So this kind of shout out to them. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
If not, what is it?
So Don Tran is the founder, and Prime Hall is the founder as well. They're both former Marine Corps Raiders, and they created this sport where it's essentially a 4-dimensional sport where you're playing underwater rugby, and you have a torpedo and there's baskets, and you're pretty much grappling underwater and holding your breath to score. It is insane. It is an amazing sport. And that's kind of my secondary introduction into aquatics exercises.
Is it played in the pool or played in the ocean?
It's played in the pool.
Okay.
So they have locations throughout the United States. Actually, it's so cool to see how much they've grown. They're just such good guys, and this sport is really insane. So that's something that I want to get back to when it comes to training, because having not only just the physical strength to be underwater and fighting somebody, but having the mental aptitude to tell yourself, no, that I don't need to breathe, that I can hold a second longer. That is such a level above when it comes to athleticism, that I think that really enhanced me when it comes to swimming.
Very cool. In wrapping up, any final words you'd like to say towards the veteran community or your company?
When it comes to my company, I think that people just really have to start absorbing the alternative perception of what travel is. Again, it's not just this luxurious filtered Instagram photo. It could be sitting on a shakety chair in the middle of Vietnam and hanging out with a couple of those guys and getting street food poisoning, or like just the small micro experiences that happen. It doesn't have to be checking off these attractions on your bucket list. It could be absorbing and sitting there and at a Parisian cafe and watching people pass by. I think like this notion of travel is so glamorous, and that's what's been promoted so much because it brings in money. But we have to be more mindful travelers. A part of the LiboRisk mission is to encourage members to leave a better footprint throughout their journeys. And as ambassadors of the United States, we do that so well in the military already, right? Having served our country, but we can go a step further. We can leave a better footprint, either by participating in ethical travel activities, picking up our trash, not engaging with things that, maybe damage our character or other people's character, or even being mindful of how we travel, right? And so I think that's something that needs to be discussed more, especially as tourism starts to make a negative impact on the world. I mean, that is a whole nother topic, but there is a damage to the ecosystem and the economy that's happening from over tourism. And we saw this during COVID, unfortunately, from nothing going on to so much going on. And I really employ service members and veterans to start thinking in that manner, because that's purpose right there, right? Is ensuring that we remain good stewards of this planet. And if we don't, then we won't have any place to travel or enjoy. But when it comes to the military community, I think that one thing that I do want to share is we have to be more vulnerable in sharing our story. There's this amazing quote by Marianne Williamson where she says, as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. And as we are liberated from our own fears, our presence automatically liberates others. I learned that at a very young age, and it's so funny to me that it's kind of carried on throughout my life, because the more that I have become vulnerable, the more I've given permission for others to do the same. And I feel like that is so medicinal for our community. And if we do that and we finally say things out loud, the act of saying things out loud, it's very hard to think things, but it's even harder to say it out loud. We can really start to come into our story and accept it, and maybe become more passive about those issues and those things that we went through. It's not that it doesn't affect us anymore. It's just we've accepted it. But that starts with saying things out loud. That's a hard thing to do.
Very true. How can people find you on social media and in the internet?
So we have a really awesome website with great resources called libo-risk.com. You just type in, it's the first thing that comes up on Google. And then we have a TikTok, a Instagram, and a Facebook group page, which is private. So that space just stays there. And I can be contacted via email. I'll even text. I don't really care. I'm always happy to talk with somebody.
I'll put the information in the show notes. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Paul. It was really great chatting with you.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.